Hi, this is Kylie with Fem and Flow. I hope everyone's having a great day. Today, we have a really interesting episode. I'm going to talk some about how this reality works when it comes to quantum physics. And actually, you'll see that what we call spirituality here is actually deeply rooted and can all be explained in quantum physics. So, if you look at it that way, spirituality is just reality. So, this is a very interesting episode that talks about that. And I'll get into specifically some more information about the six dimensional energies. If you've listened to my other podcast about the nine dimensions, I get a little more specific on the six dimensional energy in our reality right now. I think it's very, very interesting. I just want to add a disclaimer before I get going. This is for fun and entertainment purposes only. So, first, I'll just start out with a little about how this reality works. This just gives a good background and a good basis for what I'll get into a little bit later. And I've talked about this before, but I do have a new spin on it this time, so it's worth listening to for sure. So, just to start out about our bodies, I mention it a lot, but we are electromagnetic beings and we have an electromagnetic energy field. And this electromagnetic field around us is shaped as a torus, and it's our toroidal flow of energy. And this toroidal flow is donut shaped. Our energy field is ruled by sacred geometry, which is six dimensional energy. And remember that everything is energy, frequency, and vibration. Literally everything is made up of tiny strings of energy vibrating at different frequencies. And in quantum physics, this concept is called string theory. Classical or Newtonian physics explains how the third dimension works, but then we must look to quantum physics or quantum mechanics to explain the fourth dimension. I mentioned in a previous podcast about the nine different dimensions how the third dimension is physical and the fourth dimension is a non physical realm that you could view as a canopy or a veil that lays over and impacts the third dimension. The fourth dimension is the realm of archetypes, myths, and the collective mind. And how this translates to quantum physics is that this fourth dimension is what we also call the quantum field. I've mentioned before how the quantum field has endless outcomes, but I've never explained how or gone more in depth on this idea. And in physics, the double slit experiment shows what I'm about to explain. In the quantum field, there are all of these strings of energy, and they are waves of energy. Once observed, the wave of energy turns into a particle, and these particles make up what we see in our 3D reality. This wave of energy is a gradient of endless outcomes, and therefore it can be multiple things at once. Then, once an observer directs their energy on that wave, like attracts like, and the wave matches the frequency of the observer's energy, and then it turns it into a particle. And this is also the idea behind quantum computing. Our current computing is binary. You have 0 or 1, or on or off. You have two choices. It's binary. Then with quantum computing, you have this entire gradient. You don't have just two options. So, this concept is how we are constantly creating our reality, and this is also the science behind manifestation. So, before I go back and connect this to our electromagnetic body and our toroidal flow of energy, the summary points here are basically that reality is not objective, it's observer dependent. The act of observation reveals a version of reality that is unique to the observer. And quantum mechanics suggests that reality doesn't even exist in a definite state independent of observation. We really need to share this information so people really understand how they do completely create their own reality, and manifestation is not some crazy woo woo idea. It's completely rooted in quantum physics, and it's literally how our reality here works. So, like I mentioned, our electromagnetic body and our toroidal flow of energy is how our consciousness uses our physical body to send out frequencies based on our emotions. The Hawkins map of consciousness shows how different emotions have different frequencies. Our consciousness is the observer and uses our physical body's energetic flow to send out a frequency into the quantum field. Based on the emotional frequency we put out in the quantum field, an energy wave will match with the frequency we put out, and this act of observing will change the wave into a particle, and this will create our 3D reality. Like I mentioned, this energy has endless outcomes when it's in wave form. And why I don't say our thoughts create our reality and I say our emotions do is because ideally our thoughts do not automatically create an emotional response. If we have a regulated nervous system, then we won't automatically tie emotions to every thought, and you can truly just observe the thought and not let your thoughts and emotions control you. We truly want to be fully in charge of our emotions. And I have a separate episode on how to regulate your nervous system if that's something you're interested in and feel drawn to. We really want to focus and live in these high frequency emotions like love, peace, joy, compassion, and enlightenment. Because when we're radiating that and putting that out into the quantum, that's what's going to be pulled back into our 3D reality. And I mentioned earlier in this episode and in my previous episode as well, how the sixth dimension is sacred geometry. And our physical body and this toroidal flow of energy I mentioned that's in a donut shaped around us is sacred geometry. When our bodies are healthy, strong, and fit, and then we're also mentally healthy and living in these high frequency emotions, we are like towers pulling and anchoring in six dimensional energy. And this is also connected to why working out not only helps us physically, but also mentally. I'll get more into this, but sports and movements and keeping our body in that shape that naturally comes when you're moving often, this is pulling and anchoring in six dimensional energy. Okay, this is a crazy side note that hit me about six dimensional energy. Think about what I just said about our physical body's electromagnetic field pulling in 6D energy. In society, one of our main energy sources is crude oil. And crude oil is made up of mixtures of hydrocarbons that form from the remains of animals and plants that lived millions and millions of years ago. These animals and plants pulled in 6D energy just completely based off how reality and the dimensions are set up and sacred geometry. All life is ruled by sacred geometry, the form of it in the movement. So therefore these plants and animals are pulling in that 6D energy. And also think about how plants and trees can actually grow up against gravity. That's because they have their six-dimensional morphogenic field. So think about those forms that were pulling in 6D energy, they die throughout millions of years. They actually create crude oil, which we use as an energy source. Now compare this to what Nikola Tesla was doing with free energy. He was basically using sacred geometry to harness 6D energy. It's just really interesting, those two comparisons and how it actually all ties back to the sixth dimension. I don't know, I thought that was really interesting. But back to our physical bodies in the third dimension. How our bodies move, function, and are healthy all boil down to sacred geometry. Think about sports, exercise, and movement in general. The ideal outcome when it comes to a sport or certain movements are all based on a technical form, which is ultimately sacred geometry. Think think about the geometry of a perfect swing, whether it's golf, tennis, or baseball. The ideal swing that will have the best outcome when it comes to performance, it all boils down to sacred geometry and the geometry of that movement with your physical body. When the body moves in these ideal geometric movements, the body builds muscle and utilizes fat. And when our body doesn't move in these geometric movements and we are sedentary all the time, then we lose muscle, we gain fat, our posture worsens, and we get aches and pains. And go back to sports and fitness and movements for a moment. If we go against the ideal sacred geometry for our body movements, that's when we get injuries. When our body's aligned with the ideal sacred geometry, that's when we are pulling and anchoring in 60 energy. And if we do these things that pull in 60 energy, like I mentioned, we build muscle, we lose fat, and we end up with the ideal body shape according to sacred geometry. And sacred geometry is an outcome and a way of order and creation from God or the divine mind. And like I mentioned in the beginning of the episode, once you start to see the truth and this big picture, you realize that spirituality is just equivalent to physics, and physics is the order and how God set up creation. This is how we are creator beings, and we use God energy to create our reality. We use these quantum physics concepts I previously mentioned to create our reality, but we ourselves are not gods. God, the divine mind, set this magnificent, complex, and amazing structure explained in physics, so we are able to be creator beings. Since we are made from God energy, in this way we are fractals of God energy exploring itself. And I hear people touch on this concept often, but then they state, so I am God and I should act accordingly. And that's kind of how this New Age movement took a hold. It kind of puts so much power in the individual and says, you are God. But this is not the case. We are a small part of this God energy, and we need to always have love and humility. Yes, we create our reality, but it's based on all of this divine and sacred order that God, the divine mind, set up. We also are way more divinely guided than we even realize. And creation is way more complex and beautiful than we realize as well. So just never make the mistake of taking the creator out of creation. I mentioned we are creator beings, but we should not ignore the fact that there's God, this divine mind that has created all of this order and beauty that allows us to create from this God energy. And like mitosis of a cell can split and divide, but both cells are still whole after the division. We can all be fractals of God, yet God is always whole. In that way, we don't make up God, since God is always whole. We are just a fractal of God. And while God's always whole, we are whole as well, and we are sovereign beings. When we can truly go within and connect to God internally, we can actually be fully self-sustained. I mentioned in a previous episode how outside of this earth experience, there are other experiences that are truly in resonance with 5 through 9D energy. When fully in resonance, we don't have to work to anchor this energy in. We are just fully connected already. And that's why these experiences that fully resonate with the 5th through 9th dimensional energy are what we archetypally call heaven. And these experiences are just full bliss. The 8th dimension is God energy or the divine mind. And when we're fully at resonance with the 8D God energy, we are truly sovereign beings. We know our true divinity, and we are completely self sustained with this God energy. And I've also mentioned in previous podcasts how this dark global elite have hijacked the fourth dimension, created this illusion of separation so we don't remember we are divine and directly connected to God. And they set up this false matrix of control. And remember, the fourth dimension is the realm of archetypes, myths, and the collective mind. So they program us with these ideas and narratives that keep us under their control. And to keep this false matrix in place, they attempt to prevent us from anchoring in fifth through ninth dimensional energy. Because, like I just mentioned, when we're fully in resonance with that energy, we're completely sovereign, completely free, and we live in bliss, and we're completely self sustained from God energy. In one way, they attempt to cut off our access to sixth dimensional energies is by hijacking the sacred geometry of our physical bodies. And actually, now that I mention it, they also hijack the sacred geometry of architecture. Think of all the cheap, bland buildings we have now. This is all a plan and is a side effect of our economy, one of the mechanisms they use for control. And it's all done on purpose. But back to our physical bodies. I fully understand how much work it takes to stay in shape in our current society. We literally have to pay for ourselves to live by at minimum working 9 to 5, 5 days a week. We are kept busy, tired, and distracted on purpose. Because of this, our society is full of all these fatal conveniences like fast food. And many people sit at a desk all day in positions that completely cut off their 6D energy. Our food industry is making us sick, and this is wonderful for the dark global elite, who then profit off the pharmaceutical industry to usually not even heal us, just instead masking the symptoms. I am very well aware of all these control mechanisms in place to deter us. I think the first step is just to be aware of all of this and to understand the energetics behind reality. We break the false matrix control by pulling in fifth through ninth dimensional energy. And as you can see, based on what I've been talking about, it's actually extremely normal, realistic things that anchor these energies in. It's not some weird niche ritual you have to do to pull these energies in. I go more in depth on this later in the episode, but I also talk about all 9 dimensions and what we can do in our daily life to pull in these energies. I talk about that on another podcast about the 9 dimensions. You can go back and listen to that. We definitely need to start prioritizing our physical and mental, emotional health and start treating our body and emotions as they should be treated, which is like they are sacred and completely divine. If you can, start working out during your workday. Go on a walk, go to a fitness class, like really make it a priority so you can get that done during your work time and not have to do it later with your time off and your time with your family. And if you manage others in a work setting, set an example and show this is so important and show this is a really important act of self-care. Our physical body is so important energetically, and it's not just for vanity. And it's no coincidence these corporate figures come on TV and are so against remote work. I'll say this a million times in this episode, but this is not a coincidence. In every way, we really need to be the example of the change we want to see in the world. When we do this or we share ideas, it not only puts this idea out, but it also puts out that energy. And then the more people who talk about it, it puts momentum behind the energy. And remember that everything's energy and can be explained with physics. Same with this idea of momentum of energy. So now I want to get into a specific example of how the dark elite prevent us from pulling in sixth dimensional energy. And that's this whole culture of alcohol, cocaine, pills, and party drugs. Remember the torrential flow of energy that radiates from our electromagnetic body that I already talked about? These substances like alcohol and party drugs completely shred our energy field. Not only does the process of us creating our reality stop when we're drunk or even slightly hungover, it also collapses our energetic boundaries, and that causes you to take on energy around you. And think about the energy in a dark club where everyone is drunk or on a substance. This is why you may act out of alignment with your true self and your true soul when you're on drugs and alcohol. It's not true that you show your true self when you're drunk. Your energetic field is just shredded and you're being bombarded with all of this energy around you. It's not even just energy from people around you, it's the energy and programs of control that are running in the fourth dimension that are set up purposely to control humanity by the dark elite. This means whether you're a happy or a mean drunk, once you start drinking, you become the perfect puppet for the global elite program. The average individual hasn't even seen how dark this actually can go. There's a reason the P. Diddy parties are alcohol and drug fueled. It may begin as a swanky celebrity party, but it ends with blackmail that runs industries. These industries then program and influence and build up idols for the public. And when you're blind to this truth, we are part of the funding for this madness. We put our energy and our dollars towards this whole industry that's set up to control us. And it's no coincidence alcohol is such a huge part of our society. After work happy hours are mainstay in our culture. Alcohol in the college years is completely out of hand. And you're questioned more when you don't drink than when you do. We have the term sober for when we don't drink, but if we do drink, it's just completely normal. Just take a moment to really reflect on alcohol culture in this world. How weird is it that something that literally poisons us is so accepted? And like I mentioned, alcohol and party drugs, especially alcohol because how normalized it is just a tool of control for this dark global elite. We really need to wake up to that and take our power back. And it's also really interesting how alcohol use is so popular, yet THC is still illegal federally and is only legal in some states. THC actually helps you anchor in fifth dimensional energy. And fifth dimensional energy is pure love and divine feminine energy. This is why THC really enhances sex. And it can also make you want to chill and just be instead of do, which are qualities of the divine feminine energy. There are many, many stereotypes about THC users. And it's interesting to reflect on how these stereotypes are portrayed in our culture. But I'm not recommending using THC. That is totally your choice and the choice of the individual. I'm only saying it's an interesting comparison to view THC versus alcohol in our culture when alcohol is literally a poison and it's so widely used. You can also make a similar comparison when looking at studies surrounding psilocybin mushrooms. These are illegal, yet ask a friend who has taken this in a safe non-party setting, and you'll most likely get a story of insight and enlightenment. But definitely don't take my word for it. Use your own discernment, do your own research. Okay, now I'm actually going to switch gears for a moment and talk about generational trauma. So, Generational curses aren't some witchcraft curse that a lady with black hair sets over a smoky cauldron and sets a curse. Generational curses are generational trauma from this dark global elite program that has been running. This dark global elite has been messing with us and traumatizing us for centuries, generation after generation. And they don't even have to do that much work when it comes to this either because they bank on the fact that if they can just traumatize and control one generation and form this one generation's beliefs and the programming they run on, then they'll just pass this down through their own family. As a child, we are directly connected to God and this 5 through 90 energy. But as we are raised by our family, sent to school, indoctrinated by society, we are molded to fall in line with the 40 control narrative. And if your family has generational trauma they haven't worked through, then they unknowingly pass it along until someone in the family can clear it for them and no longer pass it on to their children. And while alcohol does have a big part of generational trauma because it's a way to numb out issues, other generational trauma can present way more subtly. Generational trauma can literally be any limiting belief that is passed down to you from your family. Think about our society. It can present as settling to get married because your family pushes you to and instills fear around being alone. This seems to be a big one in our society, and you should never be making any decision based on fear. I really don't agree or like it when people talk about how they're successful because of the fear they had growing up. Like, don't cut yourself short. You were successful despite having that fear. Do not give that fear any power. You did it yourself. And then generational trauma can also be when someone tries to overcorrect their parents' teaching so much that they go totally in the separate direction and the separate duality. And therefore, going that extreme causes trouble as well. We need to be balanced, understanding, open, and really focused on living aligned with love. Like I mentioned in a previous podcast, we never want to fall trap to dualities or black and white thinking. So, saying all that, we need to make sure we clear our generational trauma. We need to do shadow work, recognize the why behind our triggers, and get past these things. And once we do the shadow work, we want to release and move on from it. We don't want to make it part of our story. Because remember, we create our reality based off the emotions we radiate. So if we are telling these stories and reliving these emotions, we are continuing the cycle. So just be aware of this. Be aware of the emotions you're putting off and adjust yourself accordingly. We shouldn't spiritually bypass and ignore our shadow, but once we tackle it and understand it and work past it, we need to let it go. Don't dwell here. Also remember that everyone's doing the best they can. The family that passed on generational trauma is also doing their best. We need to give grace. And if you believe what I say about high frequency energy getting dialed up in current times, that means younger individuals come in with a different level of consciousness and spiritual awareness than older generations. Younger generations are also less programmed and have been in this false matrix of control for a shorter period of time. Younger people need to realize they may actually have a natural higher level of consciousness and really need to remember this when giving older generations grace. And older generations need to listen to the ideas of the younger generations and stop calling them lazy because they don't fall for these control narratives the dark global elite have been running. And it's no coincidence the mainstream media always seems to be putting down or attacking the younger generations. They really want to instill this idea of incompetence around the younger generations. So older generations are less open to the ideas of the younger generations. So I'm a millennial, but I personally love the stereotype of Gen Z in the workforce. They seem to take career more lightly and seem really funny about it. But maybe, I mean, that might be a stereotype, but I find it really funny and really light. And this is so refreshing to me, who was raised hearing that term girl boss and hustle culture was so pushed down my throat. Now, just thinking about it, what balanced person wants to work 9 to 5, 5 days a week? It's absolutely not normal. We're at work longer than we are with our families. We barely have time to cook a proper dinner after work, let alone work out, get out in nature, and do our hobbies. After work, there's not much time, and you really have to prioritize what you want or have to get done. We really need to start challenging the status quo and make sure we have time for proper self care, do things that are fulfilling, and keep our bodies fit and healthy. When I talk to my female friends that have kids, I literally do not know how they do it and stay sane. Not only are females expected to be great moms, but many are expected to have a career as well and to be bringing money in financially for the family. And they come home and have to make dinner and parent their children. It's just, I don't know how they do it. And at times, it seems like pulling your weight in a relationship is all financial. It seems like the proper weight isn't being put on contributing in other ways. But I definitely don't blame men for this. I blame the dark global elite. Literally, they are setting this all up on purpose. Women are completely overstretched trying to parent and hold a career so they make money for their family. But if you were to give up your career and just be a stay-at-home mom, then you're also risking your financial well-being and your sovereignty later on if things don't work out. The society is just so messed up. Under this dark global elite program, there's really not a good answer to this. It really just sets up division. But that's why it's so important that we listen to these ideas on how to harness and anchor in fifth through ninth dimensional energies so we can break this false matrix programming. And also, another interesting topic, why is it so assumed that people get married and have kids and that's the normal pace of life? I've also seen people say that it's selfish not to have kids, and I think that is a completely huge statement set up from this dark global elite program. The dark elite literally needs kids and people in society to continuing to run this program, get their energy and profit from them. And it's no secret that raising kids is extremely challenging and you have to sacrifice yourself, your body, your time, and your hobbies to have kids. Yet this is a big unspoken topic. You really can't say you regret having children. And honestly, probably when you do, your biology kicks in and you want to nurture and care for your offspring. But just because we have a biological feeling of nurturing and care that kicks in when we do have a child, just because you have that feeling doesn't mean it's the right path, if that makes sense. And there's also a trauma element here. If you had a childhood you weren't happy with, you may think you can fix that by having kids and raising them differently. And I'm definitely not saying everyone shouldn't have kids or the desire for kids stems from trauma. I'm definitely not saying that at all. I just think we need to question the status quo and question why there are certain unquestioned narratives or programs and patterns of humans in society. We really need to step back and try to understand and wake up to all the ways the dark global elite programs us and uses us as puppets. Think about what the world may look like if we weren't programmed from birth. What does true freedom and sovereignty look like for you? Also, remember everyone in society is doing the best they can under the circumstances set up by the global elite. Like, just remember this and always give people grace. This is not a normal system to be living in. This is a lot of info, but a great place to start with all of this is to stop drinking alcohol. People do not realize what they're doing when they consume alcohol. When people drink alcohol, it's cutting off your own divinity because you're no longer anchoring in the 5 through 9 dimensional energy or creating your reality with your electromagnetic body and your torrential flow. It's literally like handing over the keys to your physical vessel and handing over your puppet strings to the global elite. Like, I know I do not want to be a puppet. I am sovereign and independent, and I question the status quo, and I'm not afraid of it. People really need to wake up to this. Once you stop drinking alcohol, you'll start pulling in more 5 through 9th dimensional energy, and doing this will cause you to start seeing the truth. I stopped drinking about a year and a half ago, and I know I would not be able to talk like this and know this knowledge if I was still drinking. This whole process of getting this knowledge and sharing this on the podcast has completely been extremely divinely guided. When I'm in social settings and I'm not drinking and I'm still having fun, people often tell me they have thought about not drinking, but don't think they would have the self-control in social settings to actually say no. And the global elite set this all up on purpose. And I do not blame these people though, because the people who mention this, I don't think they comprehend, not even comprehend, I don't think they see this narrative and the dark truth behind it all. Yeah, maybe they might see, okay, alcohol is not healthy for me, but they don't see all this depth into it. And this is really why we need to stand strong in this truth, share the truth, breadcrumb these ideas where we can, and really be the change that we want to see. We need to be sovereign, be fully in control of ourselves, and not be swayed by what others are doing or what society pushes. And this may be a hot take, but if you stop drinking and start pulling in more 5 through 90 energy, you won't feel the need to go out and get energy from being social at bars. So if you're worried about giving up drinking and then becoming lonely, that won't happen. I'm not saying you won't want to go out and like spread love and build relationships in this way. I mean, you won't feel the need to go out and be social to energize yourself to fill a gap. I don't believe this whole idea that extroverts have to get their energy from others. To me, that sounds more like an energy vampire vibe, where you don't internally gather energy from source, so you must gather it from others. Sounds like the global elite, actually. We are sovereign beings, and if we are properly pulling in 5 through 9th dimensional energy, we are self-sustaining. We get this true, pure, self-sustaining energy from God, from Source, the divine mind of the 8th dimension. So if you're tapped into 8D energy, which is God energy, you are sustained and you will not feel lonely or like you need to go out and get energy from others. And same with vying for attention from others on social media. We are sovereign beings. We are not inherently needy or need attention from others on social media or need people to validate us. We are not inherently that. We are sovereign. We are divine. And once we get out of this false matrix of control and are pulling in this 5 through 9th dimensional energy, we'll be reunited with our true divinity and with this energy of who we really are. and we will not need validation. We will not need attention from others. We will fully be self sustained and sovereign and happy and in bliss. But like I mentioned, a first good step in this is to quit drinking alcohol. And when you do this, your life will drastically change for the better. If you're not sure you're ready to commit, just be sober curious and try it out for a year. I think you'll really see the changes and you won't want to pick up a drink again. And if you do this and you're offered a drink in a social setting or someone questions why you don't drink, you really don't need to give them an answer. Just say you're sober curious and keep all of this information in mind. You don't have to explain all of this in a way that they might look at you like you're crazy. You can keep this to yourself and just say you're curious because alcohol is poison. You're a healthy individual and you're into wellness. Then I bet you'll start to see the benefits of this and you'll see these amazing changes that I kind of talk about. And then you'll slowly be able to share your truth. Because, like I mentioned, once you stop drinking, you will really start to see the truth behind things. The next thing to do is purposely do things and set up a routine that pulls in 5 through 90 energy. In this episode, I mentioned a way to pull in 60 energy, and that's to keep your body in a healthy, fit condition. Sports and movement pulls in 60 energy. And as you do this, your body naturally becomes stronger and more fit. And this leads you to the ideal body shape when it comes to sacred geometry. And then that in itself, when your body is in this ideal shape, your body becomes a 60 tower that is constantly pulling in this 60 energy. Some realistic ways to harness this 60 energy in your daily life is to stand at your desk more instead of sitting. Schedule workouts during your workday so it's on your calendar. And then once you get home, you can just focus on other things like having a healthy dinner, spending time with your family, and doing your hobbies. Also, if you have hobbies that are sports and movement related, definitely do these and realize how truly important they are. And some of these sport and movement hobbies could be golf, yoga, tennis, really anything. Just get moving. And know this not only benefits you, but it also anchors in more 60 energy to this false matrix, and anchoring in more 5 through ninth dimensional energy is what will collapse it and basically free humanity. I hope that was interesting to you. I think it's just so fascinating. If you like this episode and you haven't listened to my others, you may really like the episode on the 9 different dimensions. In that one, I specifically talk about what rules the 9 different dimensions, what that all means, how to anchor in that energy, and mechanisms of control that this dark global elite have put in place to try to prevent us from pulling in that energy. And then I also mentioned I have another podcast about how to regulate your nervous system. Like I mentioned earlier in the episode, that's a huge thing when it comes to creating our reality, because we truly need to be in control of our emotions and not automatically tie emotions to every thought we have. So that's a really important one too if you really want to dive more into how we create our own reality. And like I mentioned, truly when you start learning this stuff, you realize spirituality literally is physics. The fourth dimension is quantum physics, and this completely explains our reality. And we are truly spiritual beings living a human experience. So just remember, you are totally divine. You have way more powers than you even realize, and you are sovereign. So my goal in sharing all of this is really just to help everyone remember how powerful they are so they can step back into their power and be fully in control. Let's stop letting this dark global elite secretly control things behind the scenes. Let's take our power back and Get rid of them. Also, if you like this, I share things on TikTok and I aim to post a new podcast once a week. So if you like it, please subscribe and if you feel called to do so, rate my podcast. I hope everyone has a great day and thank you so much.